So welcome to the pitch of the Smart Connected Supplier Network. My name is Rutger van der Malen. I'm together in this call with my colleagues Sam Helmer and Matthijs Punter. And Sam and Matthijs, please feel free to add to my presentation. We all work for TNO, and TNO is the Netherlands organization for applied scientific research. Just to start with the background of this Smart Connected Supplier Network, I need to go back to the fact that we have in the Netherlands a national program. It's called Smart Industry Program, which helps the industry, and by industry I mean the high-tech manufacturing industry, in the transition towards Industry 4.0. And in this national program, there are 8 industry transformations defined, and you can see them in the illustration on the right. And one of these transformations that is vital to becoming Industry 4.0 is connected factories. And basically, our Smart Connected Supplier Network is a key element in connected factories ambition. Yes, so this high-tech manufacturing industry, it's actually something that we're quite good at in the Netherlands. These are some examples of the products that are made here in the area. The wafer stepper machines from ASML, the medical equipment from Philips, electron microscopes from PHI, etc. These are typical companies that are present in the area and have also their roots in the area. And not only those companies, but also the most of the supply chains that are related to these companies are in the area available. Sam, maybe you can explain this one. You added this one.
Yeah, I will. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So let me talk for 1 minute on the why of everything that we do. So we in this call are all talking about supply chains and the importance of making supply chains more transparent, having data exchange, etc. But why in the Netherlands and why I think in Europe is it crucial to become the most competitive supply chain on the planet, especially battling both American Eagle and the Chinese Tiger? Well, I think in Europe we have a system where big OEMs outsource relatively a lot of work to their suppliers, and those suppliers in turn also outsource a lot to other suppliers. I think this is typical for a European high trust way of working, and especially in our high-tech machine building sector in the Netherlands, this is very typical. So the biggest example that we have is this company ASML. They are a world market leader in making machines that produce computer chips. So their customers are Intel and Samsung and etc. But they only were able to grow to this 85% world market share because they outsourced in their early days a lot of the development work and also production work to a very large supply chain. And this supply chain is pictured in this land picture over there. So there are more than 200 suppliers to ASML. And each one takes a part of the product. And that means that even though ASML is a world power, they cannot dictate to their own supply chain to use, for instance, which ERP software, or to dictate, for instance, what type of wording should be used concerning the amount of information that you share, like orders or planning or invoices or whatever. And the reason that they don't have this market power is that for one day their suppliers are working for ASML, but in the same week they are also for other OEMs like Philips, like Thermo Fisher, like Canon, etc., etc. And all these OEMs are asking these suppliers to adhere to their little standard. But if you have to adhere to 5 different standards the entire week, you go crazy. And that is the problem that we have been solving in the Smart Connected Supplier Network, how to make this large group of suppliers work seamlessly.
Yes, thanks, Sam. And I guess that's basically the explanation for the next couple of slides. which is a good thing. Let me see if there's anything relevant here. Well, I think this is basically the story you already shared with us. The problems that we encounter while sharing data in these typical supply chains, the different systems, standards, and semantics. This is basically also what you mentioned, and that especially in the middle of these supply chains, where you have really a bulk of manufacturers, which in turn have a lot of clients and customers. So they are really tied in a network. There's still a lot of manual labor involved in processing data, which means they have to manually copy data into their ERP systems and web portals. It's a lot of administration. There's a lot of errors made. In other words, it's not a very optimal system. This is basically the background of why we started a smart connected supplier network. Well, just to go over this quickly, obviously there are ways to share data. For example, EDI connection, where company A and company B share data through a custom-made connection. It's costly and it's not scalable, so it has really its disadvantages. Another way is through cloud solutions. Company A and B share the same service provider. Also, that has disadvantages, and one of them is the fact that the service provider has access to your data, which is not always the thing that you want. Okay, it's a good moment to introduce SCSN, right? So what is SCSN? It's basically a communication standard for sharing data in these supply chains, as we just described. So focus on low volume, high mix, and high complexity manufacturing supply chains. And Andreas already mentioned the 20% claim. That's what we expect to have as an increased productivity number. We are not there yet, but we are working towards that kind of number. So the ambition that we have with SCSN is to connect once. So as a manufacturer, you only make a connection once. Basically, as a compared to EDI, you make a connection once to a company. But by connecting once, you can access the complete supply chain. And the complete supply chain is covered from OEM, first tier, second tier, all the way to the wholesalers and, for example, steel producers. Another element is the control manufacturers have over their data. And it's really vital that they themselves decide who can access what data at what time. So how does it work? The solution that we chosen basically looks a lot like the mobile phone network. So if you buy a mobile phone, you choose your service provider, for example, Vodafone. You sign a contract with them, and from that moment on, you can phone anyone in the world, regardless of their service provider or their telephone company. And that's the same principle for SCSN. So any manufacturing company, those are the green shapes, with any ERP system, can choose their service provider of choice, the one that suits their needs the best, has the best service level for them. And by connecting once to them and setting up a connection, they can share data with any other manufacturer in this network. So what we've created in this way basically is a network of networks. And the essence really is how these service providers are communicating and connected. And what we have made is a system where basically the language that they speak, the service providers in between themselves, is smart connected supplier network, and the technical infrastructure basically is IDS. In a nutshell. So the common language that I just referred to, where I'm not going to much into all the details here, but it's basically to define the semantics of the messages that are most commonly used in the supply chains. And it was mentioned earlier in this call by somebody. So what about the agreement on what is an invoice, and what do we understand of the quantity, for example, of a product, etc. And we have come up with a set of messages that were agreed on by a large number of manufacturers already. And it's actually openly available. You can see the link in the right bottom corner. And this is really a vital part of SCSN. Well, this is basically a bit of a summary of SCSN. So what makes it different from other systems or other standards? First of all, the fact that it's an open communication standard. It's actually well, it's not yet another standard is called here, but it's actually based on UBL. So it's taking the best bits of other standards and combining them. We actively align with other and collaborate also with other industry standards. I already mentioned the four-corner model of service providers, so the network of networks element. And it's not a TNO invention, this. So we coordinate basically, but it's really the manufacturing companies and the ERP vendors and the service providers that decide on what we're going to do and how we are going to do it. And then the two elements I already mentioned, so are the common language based on UBL with already a defined set of messages available, and the technical agreements between the service providers based on IDS. Right. So where we are now at this moment, so this whole SCSN initiative started as a project, and we are still in the project phase. At the moment, we have about 10 service providers that are already, some of them already actively selling SCSN connections to their customers. Some of them are in the implementation phase. And on the other hand, we have about 200 manufacturing companies that are already either are SCSN ready, so they have a connection, or some of them actively using SCSN already.
And Rutger, I'd like to add here, if you could go to the previous slide.
Yep, sure.
So as Rutger already mentioned, so this is driven by both these manufacturing companies and ERP suppliers. That means that we are oil staining very, very fast at the moment. It took us 7 years to get to this point. And in those 7 years, we have done mostly talking about who gets to earn. So who has to do the work and who gets to earn in the system. So a lot of talk on trust. But now that we have it technically working and we have all the commercial parties building it into their ERP software and offering it as a commercial service provider offering, this is oil staining super fast. So literally, for instance, every customer of the service provider Trade Cloud, which has about 1,000 customers, is now SCSN ready, and the large majority of those are going to get working with it this year. So this is not some false claim of a bunch of researchers at TNO wanting it to grow. This is actually being used already on hundreds of thousands of messages today, and it will grow to millions and tens of millions of messages in the coming year.
Yeah, thanks. And just to finish my presentation, well, the things that we are working on in the coming 2 years, first of all, is the fact that we are now a project. We want to have a more permanent organization, so we're setting up a foundation. Foundation will be signed in May this year, and it's governed by both manufacturers, service providers, and like branch organizations. So they all have a say in the foundation. It's paid by, at the moment, the service providers. The second challenge is the scale up. So we looking to grow to about 15 to 20 service providers in the next years. And it's really there is really an incentive for the service providers to grow their client base and sell SCSM connections. So we expect to reach 1,000 connected factories, well, somewhere in a year or something like that. And the last thing is more on the technology side. First of all, the messages that we have already defined, they can always be refined, so made better, maybe expand for certain market niches. And the other thing is the technical infrastructure that also needs, we need to get that on a mature level. So a lot of challenges ahead, but on the other hand, we really have this train moving at the moment. So it's a very positive story for us. And that's the presentation. Well, there is already a website available. It's in Dutch at the moment. It will be in English somewhere in the very near future. But if you have some knowledge of Dutch, please have a look at it.